Consciousness returned not as a flood, but as a slow, agonizing reassembly of scattered data. The first thing Cale registered was the silence. It was a heavy, manufactured silence, the kind that costs a fortune to engineer on an orbital station where the hum of ventilation and the thrum of magnetic stabilizers usually create a constant, low-grade headache. Here, the air was still. It tasted of ozone, sterilized cotton, and the metallic tang of blood that had been scrubbed away but not entirely forgotten. He tried to move his arm, but the limb felt distinct from his will, heavy and detached, floating in a gravity field that was slightly, disconcertingly wrong. It was too smooth, 0.9 standard gravity, the kind used in high-therapy burn wards or the executive suites of the Orbital Council. Cale opened his eyes. The light was dim, amber-hued, filtering through smart glass that blurred the chaotic starlight outside into a soothing, abstract painting. He blinked, fighting the gummy residue of deep sedation. This was not the emergency triage deck. He remembered the shuttle, the sudden violent shudder of the hull, the screaming of metal shearing against docking clamps, and the terrifying vacuum silence that followed the breach. He remembered the chaos of the crash, the smell of burning circuitry, and the sensation of his own ribs snapping like dry twigs. That memory did not match this room. The ceiling was paneled in faux mahogany, glowing with recessed mood lighting. To his left, a medical monitor hummed without a beep, projecting his vitals in a holographic cascade of reassuring green numbers. To his right, sitting in a high-backed chair that looked more like a throne than hospital furniture, was a woman. She was watching him. Cale turned his head, the motion pulling at stiff muscles in his neck. The woman was still, possessed of a statue-like immobility that felt predatory rather than peaceful. She was wearing the standard slate-gray tunic of the station medical corps, but on her, the fabric looked severe, military. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, pale and luminous, with faintly iridescent veins branching at her throat like a delicate subterranean map. Her eyes were large, framing irises the color of dark wine held up to a candle, deep, red-violet, and unblinking. She leaned forward, the movement fluid and silent. There was no rustle of fabric, no creak of the chair. Cale's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew what she was. Everyone in the outer rim knew what she was, though polite society usually pretended they did not exist outside of horror vids and cautionary tales. A hemivore, a vrail, a vampire in the ancient rusted tongue of earth. He tried to scramble backward, to push himself up the pillows, but his body betrayed him. His right arm was anchored. He looked down, panic spiking his adrenaline levels, expecting a restraint cuff or a biosensor clamp. Instead, he saw his own hand. It was curled tight around hers. His fingers were white-knuckled, locked in a desperate grip that must have lasted for hours. He could see the small, pale pressure dents on her skin where his thumb had dug in, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving universe. Her hand was cool, motionless beneath his feverish heat. She followed his gaze, then looked back up at his face. A smile touched the corner of her mouth, sharp and amused, revealing just a hint of teeth that were slightly too perfectly aligned. "I woke up beside a vampire nurse," she murmured, her voice a low, melodic hum that vibrated in his chest. She giggled softly and said, "You held my hand all night." Cale stared at her, the absurdity of the statement clashing with the terror in his gut. He croaked. His voice was a wreck, dry as orbital dust. "I did what?" "You held my hand," she repeated, the amusement dancing in those wine-dark eyes. "Like a drowning man holding a piece of driftwood. I tried to extricate myself 3 times to check your IV line. You groaned and squeezed harder. It was remarkably needy for a council translator. Kyle snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. The loss of contact was immediate and jarring. He felt a sudden, inexplicable coldness where her skin had been. He rubbed his numb fingers, his face heating up. I was unconscious, he managed to say, trying to summon a shred of professional dignity. Reflex action, trauma response. Of course, she said, leaning back in her chair. The playful warmth evaporated, replaced instantly by a clinical, razor-sharp focus. Humans cling like life rafts when the void gets too close. It is a biological imperative. But we have more pressing matters than your subconscious attachment issues. She tapped a sequence on her wrist computer. My name is Lyra Voss. I am the senior nurse for this ward. And you, Kaylin Thorne, are a statistical anomaly. You should not be awake. The dosage of sedative I administered was sufficient to keep a Tellarite miner under for 2 days. Cale pushed himself up to a sitting position, ignoring the wave of vertigo that tilted the room 15 degrees to the left. 2 days? How long have I been here? 6 hours, Lyra said. She stood up. She was tall, her movements possessing a terrifying grace. She didn't walk. She flowed across the distance to his bedside. Which means your metabolism is burning through the blockers at 4 times the standard human rate. Tell me, Mr. Thorne, do you feel a humming sensation in your chest? Cale focused inward. There was a vibration deep inside him, beneath the sternum, like a hive of bees sealed in glass. Yes, what is that? Nanites, Lyra said flatly. She reached out and tapped the holographic display floating above his knees. It expanded, showing a map of his circulatory system. Instead of the steady red flow of blood, the diagram showed millions of glittering silver specks clustering around his ribcage and internal organs. Massive internal hemorrhaging from the crash, ruptured spleen, 3 broken ribs, perforated lung. You were bleeding out when they brought you in. Cale looked at his chest, horrified. I feel fine, sore, but fine. Because your blood is currently 50% machine, Lyra said. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the readout. These are not standard hospital issue. The station uses Class B coagulants. These are military-grade reconstruction nanites. They are knitting you back together faster than your biology can comprehend. Who authorized this treatment? I don't know, Cale said. I'm a translator. I work on syntax disputes and trade agreements. I don't have military clearance. Lyra looked at him, and for a second Kyle felt stripped bare. It wasn't just a look, it was an inhalation. She flared her nostrils slightly, her gaze dropping to the pulse point visible at his neck. You are telling the truth, she said, sounding surprised. Or at least, you believe you are. You can tell? My species are hemovores, Lyra said, turning to a supply cabinet. The glass reflected her pale face, ghost-like. We metabolize a complex protein structure found in hemoglobin. In a civilized society, the hospital synthesizes it for us. It is sterile, flavorless, and keeps us from starving. But our senses, they remain primal. Fear has a scent. Mr. Thorne, it smells like ozone and sour milk. Deception smells like copper. You smell like ozone and confusion. She turned back, holding a small, vacuum-sealed pouch filled with a thick crimson liquid. She tossed it onto his lap. Cale stared at the bag. It looked uncomfortably like blood. Drink, she ordered. Your blood sugar is crashing because the nanites are consuming your glucose reserves to power themselves. You need calories. Kyle picked up the pouch, grimacing. Is this? Yours? Lyra let out a short, sharp laugh. It is a high-calorie nutrition gel, raspberry and iron supplement. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. If it were strawberry, you wouldn't be blushing. Cale ripped the tab off with his teeth and took a swallow. It tasted like metallic jam, cloyingly sweet and heavy. He forced it down, watching her. She was terrifying. Yes, but there was something else. A tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that didn't match the calm, sterile environment of the luxury suite. Why am I in this room? Kyle asked, wiping his mouth. This is a private suite. My insurance covers a bunk in the general ward. Barely. A very good question, Lyra said softly. She moved to the window, pressing a hand against the smart glass. There were 14 people on that shuttle. The pilot, the co-pilot, 3 council delegates, and 9 support staff, including you. Are the others dead? Lyra said. She didn't sugarcoat it. Impact trauma, hull breach decompression, you are the sole survivor. The weight of the words hit Cale harder than the crash had. He slumped back against the pillows, the nutrition gel churning in his stomach. Everyone? Everyone, she confirmed. Except you were not just lucky, Kyle. You were preserved. Those nanites were in your system before the crash. They activated upon trauma impact. Cale shook his head. That's impossible. I had a physical last week. Standard screening for the new contract. Then someone put them in you afterwards, Lyra said. She turned from the window, her face shadowed. And whoever did it, they... A soft chime echoed through the room. The door light turned from red to green. Lyra's posture changed instantly. The fluid, predatory grace vanished, replaced by the stiff, subservient posture of a standard medical drone. She clasped her hands behind her back and lowered her gaze. Visitor, she whispered, her lips barely moving. Careful. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. A man stepped in. He was wearing the high-collared, midnight blue suit of the council secretariat. He was impeccably groomed, his hair slicked back with expensive oils, his face a mask of polite, bureaucratic concern. He carried a sleek black data tablet. Mr. Thorne, the man said. His voice was smooth like polished stone. I am Administrator Hines, Office of Station Stability. I was relieved to hear you regained consciousness. Cale sat up straighter, the translator in him automatically analyzing the man's cadence. Relieved. A word that implied personal investment, yet Hines's tone was purely transactional. Stability, a euphemism for control. Administrator, Cale said, his throat tight. Nurse Voss tells me I'm the only survivor. Hines's eyes flicked briefly to Lyra, then dismissed her as if she were a piece of furniture. A tragic malfunction. The shuttle's navigational thrusters failed during the docking sequence. We are already conducting a full inquiry. I heard an explosion, Cale said. Before the spin, it didn't feel like a thruster failure. It felt like a hull rupture. Hines smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Trauma memory is often unreliable. Mr. Thorne. The brain invents narratives to make sense of chaos. The flight recorder confirms a mechanical fault. He walked to the side of the bed, placing the tablet on the adjustable table. Because of the sensitive nature of the delegates on board and the potential for panic among the station's civilian population, we are sealing the incident report. We need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement. It simply states that you will not discuss the details of the crash until the official investigation is concluded. For the sake of public stability. Kyle looked at the tablet. The text was dense, legalese designed to bury the truth. He scanned the paragraphs, his training kicking in. Waive all rights to litigation. Acknowledge that sensory recollections are non-factual. Agree to indefinite monitoring. This isn't a standard NDA, Cale said, looking up. This classifies my own medical records as state secrets. It says I can't even talk to a doctor outside of the council network. Standard procedure for high-profile incidents, Hines said, holding out a stylus. It ensures you get the best care. We take care of our own. Mr. Thorne, just sign, and we can move you to a long-term recovery facility in the core ring. Cale hesitated. The smell of ozone, the scent of fear was strong in the room, but he realized with a jolt that it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from Lyra. She was standing near the foot of the bed. As Hines pushed the tablet closer, Lyra took a step forward. It seemed accidental, a shifting of weight, but she placed her body between Cale's line of sight and the administrator. She wasn't touching Cale, but he could feel the radiant heat of her, a wall of biological energy. Administrator, Lyra said, her voice mild, professional. The patient's cortisol levels are spiking. His neural pathways are still recovering from the nanite integration. Forcing him to process complex legal text right now could trigger a seizure. Hines glared at her. I did not ask for your opinion. Nurse, it is not an opinion, sir. It is a medical fact, she said. She didn't back down. She stood close enough to Cale that her uniform brushed the blanket, creating a subtle barrier. She picked up the tablet, her movements efficient. I cannot clear him for legal consent until his vitals stabilize. That will take at least 12 hours. Hines looked at Lyra, his eyes cold and calculating. He looked at the tablet in her hand, then back to Cale. Very well. Stability is paramount, after all. He snatched the tablet back from her. I will return at 0800 hours. I expect you to be ready to sign, Mr. Thorne. For your own good. He turned and marched out, the door hissing shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, vibrating with unsaid things. Lyra stood still for a count of 10 seconds, listening. Then she exhaled, a sound that was less a breath and more a release of pressure. She moved to the wall and tapped a control. The translucent privacy curtains around the bed polarized, turning opaque and sound dampening. The room shrank to just the bed and the nurse. She turned to him, and the calm mask was gone. Her eyes were wide, burning with intensity. You cannot sign that, she whispered. I gathered that, Kyle said. He was lying. I could hear it in his syntax. He used passive voice every time he mentioned the crash. Distancing language. It is worse than lying, Lyra said. She moved close, her voice dropping to a register so low he had to strain to hear it. I saw the manifest. The original one. Before the crash. And the casualty list was edited, she said. When you arrived, the triage computer flagged you as patient Doe. But 5 minutes later, the system updated. It marked Calen Thorne as deceased at scene. You are dead. Cale. Legally. You died on that shuttle. Cale felt the blood drain from his face. But Hines just spoke to me. He wants me to sign an NDA. He wants to secure the loose end before he cuts it, Lyra hissed. The NDA gives them legal custody of your body. Once you sign, they move you to the long-term facility. You will never arrive there. You are a glitch in their cleanup operation. You survived something you were meant to die in, and now they are trying to figure out how you survived before they finish the job. The nanites, Cale realized. They want to know about the nanites. Exactly. Someone protected you. Someone powerful enough to seed you with illegal military tech, but not powerful enough to stop the crash. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The green numbers on the medical monitor turned amber. "Alert!" A synthetic voice droned from the ceiling speakers. "Security protocol initiated. Rerouting localized drone patrols to Sector 4, Medical Suite Alpha." Lyra froze. Her head snapped toward the door. "That is this suite." The monitor pinged loudly. A text box appeared on the screen. Biometric confirmation required. Attending Nurse Voss. Re-verify patient status. "They are checking," Lyra said, her hands moving fast now. She went to the console, her fingers flying over the haptic interface. "The AI is looking for your life signs. If it confirms you are awake and unsedated, it will flag Hines." "What do we do?" Kyle asked, throwing the blanket off. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold. "Confirm," the computer intoned. "Re-verify." Lyra looked at the screen, then at Kyle. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, metallic disc, his personal ID band, which had been cut off his wrist when he arrived. "I should not do this," she said, mostly to herself. "This is treason. This is career suicide." "Lyra," Kyle said. She looked at him. For the first time, he saw the fear behind the wine-dark eyes. She was terrified. Her species was marginalized, watched, tolerated only because they were useful. If she helped him, she wasn't just risking a job, she was risking her life. "I have a choice," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can sedate you. I can let Hines come back. I can survive. Or—" She didn't answer. Instead, she jammed her thumb onto the console's sensor. "Override accepted," she typed a command. The monitor beeped. Status, patient critical, coma induced. She grabbed a syringe from the tray, uncapped it, and sprayed the contents into the air recycler vent. "Faking the chemical readout," she muttered. Then she turned and threw Kale a pair of scrub pants from the lower shelf. "Put these on. Now." "You're helping me," Kale said, struggling into the pants. His ribs screamed in protest, but the pain felt distant, muted by the nanites. "I am likely killing us both," she corrected. She grabbed a heavy thermal-lined medical cape and threw it over his shoulders. "Listen to me closely. We have about 3 minutes before the physical drone patrol sweeps this corridor. The AI thinks you are in a coma. We need to vanish before eyes get on you." She moved to the door, listening against the panel. Then she turned back to him. "1 minute," she said, holding up a finger. Her eyes locked onto his. "You have 1 minute to decide. You can stay here and hope your diplomacy works on an airlock. Or you can trust the vampire nurse who smells your fear." Kale looked at the door, then at her. He thought of the coldness of Hines, the lie about the thrusters. He thought of the way Lyra had stood between him and the tablet, a shield of bone and pale skin. "I trust you," he said. "Good," she said. "Then move." She hit the door release. They stepped out into the corridor. It was gleaming white, curved and empty. The silence was broken only by the distant whir of cleaning bots. Lyra didn't run. She moved with a fast gliding walk that ate up the distance. Kyle struggled to keep up, his bare feet slapping softly on the polymer floor. She led him not toward the elevators, but toward a service hatch labeled Biohazard Disposal, Authorized Personnel Only. "Wait," Kale hissed. "Disposal?" "The sensors there are calibrated for waste, not life signs," she whispered back, scanning her badge. The hatch cycled open, revealing a dimly lit, narrow maintenance tunnel that smelled of disinfectant and old steam. "It connects to the laundry chutes and the lower ventilation shafts." She ushered him inside and sealed the hatch behind them. The darkness was immediate, broken only by the bioluminescent glow of the veins in her neck and the faint red standby lights of the tunnel. "Rule 1 of survival," Lyra said, her voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. She turned to face him, the red light casting her in stark, dramatic relief. "Trust isn't blind, Kale. It is chosen, moment by moment. You chose to follow me. Now I choose to lead you. If you hesitate, we die. Understand?" "I understand," Kyle said. The nanites buzzed in his chest, a second heartbeat. "Then run!" She took off. They sprinted through the underbelly of the medical deck. Steam hissed from pressure valves, obscuring the path. Kyle followed the glowing map of her veins, the only beacon in the gloom. Above them, he could hear the heavy thud of security boots on the pristine floors they had just left. The alarm finally sounded, a blaring, rhythmic klaxon that shattered the peace of the station. Red emergency lights began to strobe, turning the tunnel into a disorienting flicker of blood and shadow. Lyra vaulted over a bundle of conduits, her lab coat flaring behind her like wings. She looked back at him, and for a split second, the red light caught her face. She was smiling. It wasn't the polite smile of a nurse, or the predatory smile of a monster. It was the wild, breathless smile of someone who had just jumped off a cliff and decided to enjoy the fall. "Keep up, translator," she called out over the alarms. Kale pushed his battered body harder, his lungs burning, his mind racing. He realized then that the giggle she had mentioned, the one from the night he held her hand, hadn't been innocence. It hadn't been a cute reaction to a patient's affection. It was bravery. She had been terrified, holding the hand of a man marked for death, sitting in the center of a conspiracy, and she had giggled to keep from screaming. He ran into the dark, chasing the vampire who had saved his life, leaving the safety of the cage behind. The transition from the sterile, hushed corridors of the medical bay to the station's internal infrastructure was jarring. A violent shift from silence to a cacophony of mechanical groans. They had slipped through the waste disposal hatch and descended into the vaneways, the labyrinth of maintenance tunnels that snaked behind the sleek, polished walls of the capital station. Here, the station did not pretend to be a paradise. It was a machine, hot and struggling. Kalen Thorne stumbled as his bare feet hit the grated metal walkway. The air was thick, tasting of recycled coolant and ozone. Enormous heat pipes, wrapped in thermal foil that looked like shedding skin, ran along the ceiling, pulsing with an amber glow that provided the only light. Where the insulation was frayed, condensed frost swirled in the air like trapped breath, creating microclimates of freezing mist next to waves of suffocating heat. "Keep moving," Lyra Voss said. Her voice was no longer the soft, modulated tone of a nurse. It was sharp, cutting through the din of the ventilation fans. "The disposal sensors operate on a 10-minute cycle. If we are still in this sector when the flush initiates, the temperature will drop to absolute zero to sterilize the waste." Kyle hurried to catch up to her. The thermal cape she had thrown over him was heavy, but it did little to block the bone-deep chill that radiated from the frost pockets. "Where are we going?" he shouted over the roar of a pressure valve releasing steam nearby. "Down," Lyra said. She didn't look back. She moved through the maze with terrifying familiarity, ducking under low-hanging conduits and stepping over pools of oily runoff without breaking stride. "The upper decks are compromised. Hines will have the station AI scanning every elevator and tram line for your biometric signature. We need to get to the Undercity." Kyle looked at her back, the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her pale hair caught the amber light of the pipes. She was an enigma that was rapidly becoming his only reality. "You know these tunnels too well for a nurse," Kale said, breathless. Lyra paused at a junction, scanning a rusted keypad on a blast door. She punched in a code, 7419, with practiced speed. The door groaned and hissed open. "I am not just a nurse, Cale," she said, ushering him through. "I am assigned to Ward 0. It is a restricted facility within the medical spire. It is where the council elites go when they need treatments that are not strictly legal. Discretion is part of my job description. Sometimes that means knowing how to enter and exit without being seen by the cameras." The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the roar of the fans. They were in a quieter, narrower service corridor now, lined with lockers and discarded maintenance gear. Lyra leaned against the wall, her chest heaving slightly. The adrenaline of the escape was starting to plateau, leaving room for the weight of the situation to settle. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small glass vial. It was sealed with black wax and stamped with a silver symbol, a double helix wrapped around a dagger. She stared at it, and Cale saw a flicker of genuine revulsion cross her face. She flinched, a microscopic tremor in her hand, before her fingers curled tight around the glass to hide it. "What is that?" Cale asked. "Insurance," she said darkly. She held it up to the dim light. The liquid inside was thick, viscous, and a color that shifted between deep purple and black. "This is not medicine. It is a blood-derived compound, a highly concentrated extraction from donors." "Donors?" Cale asked. "You mean voluntary?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes dark wine pools of cynicism. "In the Outer Rim colonies, voluntary is a word that appears on forms after the fact. This compound arrests cellular decay. It creates artificial longevity. It clears the mind, sharpens the reflexes, and suppresses empathy. The council leaders take it to stay in power for centuries. And they use staff like me, hemivores, to process it. Because our biology can separate the enzymes without destabilizing the sample." She shoved the vial back into her pocket. "It is also addictive, and it makes them obedient to the source. It is control in a bottle." They continued walking, the path sloping downward. The gravity began to fluctuate. The station's artificial gravity generators were housed in the core, and down here in the maintenance shafts, the field was inconsistent. Cale stepped over a bundle of cables and suddenly felt the floor drop away from his senses. He pitched forward, his center of gravity vanishing into a pocket of null G. He flailed, his hands grasping for a handhold that wasn't there. "Whoa!" Lyra moved faster than human reflex allowed. She didn't grab his waist or pull him against her chest, an intimacy that would have been easy, instinctive. Instead, she caught him by the sleeve of his thermal cape. Her grip was iron hard, anchoring him without touching his skin. She swung him back into the stable gravity zone with a controlled pull. Cale landed on his feet, stumbling, and found himself standing inches from her. The corridor was tight. Her back was against a wall of conduit pipes. He was looming over her. One hand braced on the wall next to her head to steady himself. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The air between them felt charged, electric, smelling of the ozone of the machinery and the faint, cool scent of her skin like rain on slate. Lyra looked up at him. Her eyes flicked down to his mouth, a subtle, almost involuntary movement before snapping back to his eyes. The hunger was there, not just the predatory hunger of her species, but something else. Something terrifyingly human. She stepped back first. It was a retreat, a deliberate re-establishment of the professional line she had already crossed a dozen times. She exhaled a short laugh, breathless and sharp. "Careful, translator. I would hate for you to survive an assassination attempt only to break your neck tripping over a cable." Cale straightened, pulling his cape tighter, trying to ignore the heat rising in his neck. I'm still getting used to the station legs. Gravity feels optional down here. He tried to lighten the mood, to bridge the sudden jagged gap between them. I thought vampires were supposed to be supernatural. Aren't you allergic to sunlight or garlic or something? Shouldn't we be avoiding the heating lamps? Lyra smirked, the expression softening the severe angles of her face. That is Earth folklore. I enjoy garlic. It adds zest to synthetic plasma. And as for sunlight, no. She turned and began walking again, her stride long and purposeful. I am not allergic to sunlight, Kyle, but I am severely allergic to bureaucracy, which is why we are currently fugitives. They descended for another 20 minutes until the silence of the maintenance tunnels gave way to a dull, rhythmic thumping bass. The air grew thicker, warmer, and smelled of frying oil, exotic spices, and unwashed bodies. Welcome to the Undercity, Lyra said. They emerged onto a rusted catwalk overlooking a sprawling, chaotic cavern that had been carved out of the station's lower cargo bays. It was a city beneath the city. Makeshift stalls constructed from shipping container panels were stacked 3 stories high, illuminated by flickering neon signs in a dozen languages. Holographic graffiti coated the walls, moving and shifting. The blood is the life, but the coin is the knife. Council lies. Remember Orion 7. Crowds moved through the narrow alleyways below, scavengers in ragged pressure suits, dock workers with cybernetic limbs, and shadowed figures trading illicit tech. Keep your head down, Lyra warned, pulling the hood of her scrub top up. Down here, a council ID is worth more than a kidney, and you have the face of a man who sleeps in clean sheets. Cale pulled the thermal cape over his head, shadowing his face. What is this place? The leaking drain of the capital, Lyra said. Where the workers live who cannot afford the oxygen tax on the upper decks, and where people talk about things the council tries to silence. They navigated the crowded market. Cale felt eyes on him, calculating, hungry looks. He heard whispers in dialects he recognized from his work, trade cant, low gutter, and the rapid-fire click-speak of the insectoid districts. They were whispering about blood taxes and the harvest. Lyra stopped abruptly in front of a stall that appeared to be selling refurbished droid parts. A young man with bright blue spiked hair and a cybernetic eye was arguing with a customer over the price of a power converter. Rico, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the noise. The young man spun around, his cybernetic eye whirred as it focused, zooming in. A grin split his face, revealing a gold tooth. "Nurse Voss!" Rico exclaimed, spreading his arms. "My favorite customer. You here for the memory chips? I swear, I wiped the encrypted data this time, clean as a whistle." "I need information. Rico," Lyra said, stepping into the stall and pulling Cale with her. "And discretion." Rico's mechanical eye shifted to Cale. The aperture narrowed. He tilted his head, the grin fading into a look of predatory recognition. "Wait a minute," Rico said. He tapped the side of his head, accessing a neural link. "I know this face. I was watching the news feeds. Shuttle crash. Sole survivor. Tragic loss of diplomatic talent." "You're the ghost," Rico laughed, rubbing his hands together. "Oh, this is gold. This is platinum. Do you know what the tabloids would pay for an exclusive interview with the dead man walking? Or better yet, I could sell his location to..." Lyra moved. It was a blur. One moment she was standing 3 feet away. The next, she had Rico pinned against a stack of server racks. Her hand was on his throat, not squeezing, just resting there, a cold, heavy warning. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Rico, Look at my eyes. Rico froze. He looked. If you sell him, Lyra said, I will not buy you out. I will not patch you up when the gangs break your legs. And I will personally ensure that your blood supply comes from the batch labeled expired. Do we have an understanding? Rico swallowed hard. Okay. Okay. Chill. Voss. Just business. I'm an entrepreneur. You know that. No selling. Scout's honor. She released him. He slumped, rubbing his neck. You're scary when you're protective, would you know that? Tell us what is happening upstairs, Lyra commanded. Why is the council locking down the medical bay? Rico sighed, hopping up to sit on his counter. He tapped his temple, and a holographic projection sparked to life in the air between them. It showed a spinning 3D model of a legislative document. The Medical Harmony Act, Rico said. The vote is in 36 hours. Everyone is talking about it. Cale stared at the hologram. I translated the preamble for that bill. It's just a standardization of healthcare protocols across the colonies. It's supposed to improve supply chains. That's the wrapper. Sunshine, Rico scoffed. The candy coating. But look at the code. I cracked the sublayer yesterday. He swiped his hand, and the text expanded, highlighting paragraphs in red. Hidden clause, Rico explained. Section 84, mandatory biometric integration for public safety. It mandates that every citizen in the coalition receive a new generation of health implants, compliance nanites. Cale felt a cold pit open in his stomach. Compliance nanites? Like the ones in me? Similar, Lyra said, staring at the text. But yours are military-grade repair units. These are limiters. Bingo, Rico said, and they monitor adrenaline, dopamine, aggression. If a citizen gets too angry, say, at a protest, the nanites release a sedative. If they work too slow, a stimulant. It's remote control population management. The elite get the longevity serum and live forever. The poor get turned into efficient, docile batteries. And the serum, Lyra said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. It requires harvesting. That is why they blame my people. The council tells the public that vampires are stealing children, draining colonies dry. They stage attacks to create fear. Then they present the Medical Harmony Act as the solution, a way to monitor everyone and protect them from the monsters. While the council drinks the harvest themselves, Cale finished. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had worked on this document. He had sat in plush offices, translating the legal jargon into palatable High Terran, ensuring the syntax was elegant and persuasive. He had polished the shackles. I helped them, Cale whispered. He leaned against the counter, feeling sick. I translated the clauses about resource allocation. I didn't realize. God, I missed the coding. I thought it was just bureaucratic phrasing. That is how they work, Lyra said softly. She reached out, almost touching his arm, but stopped short. They hide the knife in the paperwork. You were not meant to see it. That is why they tried to kill you. You overheard something, or you saw a discrepancy you were not supposed to catch. We need a place to think, Lyra told Rico. Somewhere off the grid, no cameras. Rico pointed a greasy thumb toward the back of his shop. The server room, shielded walls, no signal gets in or out, 500 credits for the hour. Lyra glared. On the house, Rico corrected quickly. For old time's sake. The server room was cramped, humming with the white noise of cooling fans. It was lit only by the blinking blue lights of the data towers. It felt like the inside of a computer, cold and detached. Cale sat on a crate, his head in his hands. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating thing. I'm just a translator, he muttered. I'm not a soldier, I'm not a spy. I just wanted to see the stars. Lyra stood in front of him. She was quiet for a long time. Then she knelt, bringing her face level with his. You are alive, she said. That is a rebellion in itself. Thank you, he said, looking up. His eyes met hers. For saving me, for dragging me out of that bed. You didn't have to. Yes, Lyra said. Her voice was uncharacteristically small. I did. She looked away, tracing the line of a cable on the floor. Last night, when you were unconscious, I sat by your bed to monitor the nanite integration. It is a painful process. Your body was fighting it. You were seizing. She paused. I reached out to check your pulse and your hand. It found mine. You grabbed me, and you stopped shaking. Kyle watched her. The arrogance, the sarcasm, the vampire mystique, it all stripped away, leaving someone lonely and terrified. I tried to let go, she confessed, her voice a whisper. But your hand, it asked for mine. It held on like I was the anchor. And I let you. I stayed there for 6 hours, Kale. Because for 6 hours I was not a tool. I was not a monster to be feared or a nurse to be ordered around. I was just needed. She went still, her posture rigid, as if she had just admitted to a capital crime. Shame radiated off her. She began to pull back, to stand up and retreat behind her walls. Lyra, Kale said softly. He didn't grab her, he didn't reach out. He stayed perfectly still, his hands on his knees. May I touch you? He asked. It was a simple question, a question of agency. Lyra looked at him, startled. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the fear, the pity. She found none. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Slowly, deliberately. Kale leaned forward. He didn't take her hand. He didn't kiss her. He leaned his forehead against hers. It was a point of contact that felt hotter than fire. Skin against skin, mind against mind. He felt her breath hitch. He felt the trembling tension in her frame. For a long moment, they existed in that small shared space, the hum of the servers fading into the background. It was an acknowledgement of shared survival, of two people standing on the edge of the abyss and choosing not to jump alone. They stayed like that for 10 seconds, drinking in the proximity. Then, as if the intensity became too much to bear, they pulled back simultaneously. Lyra stood up quickly, smoothing her scrubs. Her hands were shaking. Kyle cleared his throat, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Right, Lyra said, her voice unsteady. We need a plan. Before Kale could answer, the door to the server room slid open with a bang. Rico stood there, his face pale, holding a data pad. Guys, Rico said. We have a problem, a big, expensive problem. He shoved the data pad at Lyra. I was scanning the bounty boards, you know, just to see the heat levels. Look at this. Lyra looked at the screen. Her expression went icy. Kale stood up and looked over her shoulder. It was a bounty posting, a high-priority retrieval order. But it wasn't from the Council Police. It was from a corporation called Ethelgard Biotics. Target, Asset 7 Voss. Status, defective sound rogue. Instructions, return for recalibration or terminate. Reward, 50,000 credits. Asset, Kale read. They listed you as an asset? Stolen property, Lyra corrected, her voice dripping with venom. I am not just an employee, Kale. I was bonded to Ethelgard. They paid for my education, my placement, and apparently, they think they own my blood. There's a tracker, Rico said nervously. The bounty says you have a subdermal locator. It's dormant usually, but if they activate it, They can find me anywhere, Lyra finished. And it just pinged, Rico said, backing away toward the door. Like 30 seconds ago. The hunters are coming. And they aren't the station security, they're private contractors, mercs. We need to leave, Lyra said. She grabbed Kale's arm. Now. Where? Kale asked. If they can track you, we can't hide. Then we stop hiding, Lyra said. Her eyes were hard now, the vulnerability of the moment before locked away behind steel doors. We need to get to the data vault in the spire. That is where the proof of the Medical Harmony conspiracy is stored. If we can get that file, we can expose them before they vote. The spire? Rico squeaked. That's 300 floors up. You'll never get past the blast doors. We are not taking the elevator, Lyra said. Rico, do you still have access to the medical logistics network? Maybe, Rico said. Why? There is a courier pod scheduled for a blood delivery to the High Council chambers in 10 minutes, Lyra said. Route it to the Undercity dock. You want to steal a blood wagon? Rico stared at her. That's insane. Those things are automated bullets. Do it, Lyra snapped. Rico scrambled to his console. Okay, rerouting courier pod 404. Override code. Damn it. Okay, got it. It's docking at Bay 12 in 2 minutes. Go, Lyra told Kale. They burst out of the server room, running back into the chaotic market. But the atmosphere had changed. The shadows seemed deeper. Above them, hovering drones, sleek, black, and silent, were descending from the upper levels like vultures. They are here, Lyra hissed. A laser sight swept across the crowd, a red line cutting through the neon haze. It landed on Kale's chest. Run! They sprinted toward Bay 12, dodging startled shoppers and overturning carts of scrap metal to create obstacles. A plasma bolt seared the air where Kale's head had been a second before, scorching the wall. Asset 7 Voss! A mechanically amplified voice boomed from above. Stand down. Compliance is mandatory. Compliance is boring, Lyra shouted back. They reached the docking bay just as a sleek white capsule, the courier pod, slammed into the locking clamps. It was small, designed for cargo, not people. Lyra smashed the control panel with her elbow, shattering the lock. The canopy hissed open. Get in! Kale scrambled into the cramped interior, squeezing between refrigerated containers marked biohazard. Lyra dove in on top of him, her body pressing him into the cold metal floor. Strap in, she yelled, slamming the canopy shut. There are no straps, Kyle yelled back. Then hold on. Lyra punched the manual release. The pod disengaged from the dock with a violent lurch. The gravity engines kicked in, and they were blasted out of the Undercity and into the open void of the station's central transit shaft. The G-force pinned them together. Through the reinforced glass of the canopy, Kale saw the vast, dizzying drop of the shaft, lights blurring into vertical lines. Behind them, 3 security drones peeled off the wall, their engines screaming as they gave chase. Here we go! Lyra laughed. It was a breathless, wild sound. She grabbed the manual flight stick, wrestling the automated pod into submission. They banked hard to the left, scraping the side of a docking ring with a shower of sparks that lit up the cockpit. You're crazy, Kale shouted, staring at the drones growing larger in the rear view. I am a vampire nurse fleeing a corporate army in a stolen blood bucket, she yelled, her eyes shining with manic delight. Crazy is the baseline. Kale, hang on. She pushed the stick forward, and the pod dove, plummeting down the shaft toward the distant glowing heart of the station, with the drones slicing the air behind them. Daring fear to catch up. The courier pod groaned as it slammed into the automated receiving dock of the council spire. The sound was not the graceful hiss of a passenger liner, but the screech of metal violently meeting metal. a sonic bruise that vibrated through the hull. Inside, the air was cold and stale, smelling of preserved biological samples and the burnt ozone of the gravity drive. Kalen Thorne unclenched his hands from the cargo netting. His knuckles were white. He looked over at Lyra Voss. She was already moving, her fingers flying over the keypad to disengage the emergency seals. Her face was pale, the iridescent veins at her throat pulsing with a faint rhythmic light. But her expression was terrifyingly calm. "We have 3 minutes before the logistics AI flags this pod as unauthorized," Lyra said, her voice steady. "The Spire's security grid is tighter than the hospital's. We cannot run. If we run, we die." "So we walk?" Kyle asked, unbuckling his harness. The gravity here was firm, authoritative, nothing like the wavering pull of the undercity tunnels. "We do not just walk," Lyra corrected. She popped the hatch, and the hiss of equalization pressure filled the small cabin. "We belong here. We are bored, overworked, and irritated by the delay. That is the universal camouflage of the bureaucracy. Put this on." She tossed him a lab coat she had scavenged from the pod's emergency locker. It was a size too small, tight across his shoulders, but it bore the silver crest of the medical logistics division. Lyra adjusted her own scrubs, smoothing the wrinkles with a sharp snap of her wrists. She pulled her hair back, severe and tight, transforming from the wild fugitive of the tunnels back into the consummate professional. They stepped out onto the docking platform. It was a cavernous space of polished steel and silence, populated by silent drones gliding along magnetic rails. Far below, through the floor-to-ceiling transparasteel windows, the lights of the undercity were a distant, chaotic smear. Here, everything was cold, clean, and dangerous. They moved toward the main lift banks. Kyle felt the instinct to crouch, to hide. But Lyra walked with a stride that demanded space. She did not look at the security cameras. She looked through them, as if they were beneath her notice. "Shoulders back," she murmured without turning her head. "You are not a fugitive. You are a senior analyst with a migraine." They reached the security checkpoint for the data vault. 2 guards stood by the blast doors, wearing the matte black armor of the Council elite. Their faces were hidden behind tactical visors. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He felt sweat prickling at his hairline. "ID," the guard on the left commanded. His voice was synthesized, stripped of humanity. Lyra stepped forward. She didn't offer an ID card. Instead, she projected a holographic manifest from her wrist computer, thrusting it into the guard's personal space with a sigh of annoyance. "Courier delivery for Administrator Hines," Lyra said. Her tone clipped. "Biologics transfer. Code Red 7. We are already 20 minutes behind schedule because your docking clamps are misaligned. If this sample degrades, I will tell the administrator to bill the cost to your personal pension." The guard hesitated. The aggression, the specific jargon, the sheer audacity of her boredom, it stalled his protocol. He scanned the manifest. It was fake, compiled by Rico minutes ago, but the formatting was perfect. "Scanning biometric signatures," the guard said. "Make it fast," Lyra snapped. "I have a shift change in 10 minutes. The laser swept over them. Kyle held his breath. The light turned green. "Clear," the guard said, stepping aside. "Proceed to level 42. As the blast doors slid shut behind them, enclosing them in the velvet-lined lift, Kale let out a breath that shook his entire frame. "Pension," Kale whispered, staring at her. "You threatened his pension." "The only thing a guard fears more than a bullet is poverty," Lyra said, watching the floor numbers climb. Her eyes remained forward, but her hand brushed his arm briefly, a touch of reassurance that vanished as quickly as it came. "We are in Level 42 was the nervous system of the station. The data vault wasn't a room of servers, it was a cathedral of information. The walls were lined with crystalline storage drives that glowed with a soft, blue pulse. The air was frigid, kept at near freezing temperatures to preserve the delicate quantum processors. They navigated the labyrinth of data towers until they reached the central terminal. It stood on a raised dais, protected by a heavy glass barrier and a single, ominous console. "This is it," Lyra said, stopping before the console. "The primary archive." Kyle looked at the interface. There was no keypad, no card slot, just a smooth black sensor pad and a camera lens that looked too much like a human eye. "It's a biolock," Kyle said, recognizing the tech from his translation work on security manuals. "It doesn't just read fingerprints, it reads micro-expressions, pupillary response, and pulse rate. If you're stressed, if you're lying, if your heart rate is 5 beats above resting, it triggers a lockdown." "I know," Lyra said as she looked at her own hands. They were trembling slightly. "My heart rate is 120. I cannot pass it." "And I don't have clearance," Kyle said. "So we're stuck." "No," Lyra said. She turned to him. The wine-dark eyes searched his face. "You have the clearance code. You translated the act. You know the syntax the Council uses for priority access, but you need to be calm." "I'm not calm," Kale said, his voice rising. "I'm terrified." "Then we will fix that," Lyra said. She stepped close to him. Too close. She placed one hand on his chest, directly over his heart. The coldness of the room seemed to vanish, replaced by the intense, localized heat of her palm. She took his hand and placed it on her own chest, just below her throat. "Feel that?" she whispered. "That is fear. We are both afraid, but fear is just biology. It is just chemistry." She locked eyes with him. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. "Breathe with me," she commanded softly. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She inhaled, a slow, deliberate expansion of her ribs beneath his hand. Kale matched her. He focused on the rhythm, on the iridescent light pulsing in her neck veins. It was hypnotic. "Slower," she murmured. "Imagine the blood is heavy. Imagine it is oil, not water. Slow it down." It felt like dancing. It was an intimate, silent synchronization. He watched her eyes and she watched his, and the world narrowed down to the space between their faces. He felt his heart rate drop, compelled by her will and his own need to match her steadying calm. The frantic bird in his chest settled into a slow, powerful beat. "Good," she whispered. Her voice was a caress. "Now turn around. Do not break the rhythm." Kale turned to the console. He kept the feeling of her hand on his chest in his mind. He placed his hand on the black sensor. The camera whirred. A blue light scanned his eyes. Name, Kalen Thorne. Status, deceased. The screen flashed red. "Override," Kale said, his voice flat, devoid of the panic screaming in his head. "Authorization Delta 9 Echo, syntax key, harmony." The machine paused. It was reading his pulse. 60 beats per minute, steady, calm, identity confirmed, override accepted. "Welcome, senior translator." The red light turned blue. The glass barrier hissed open. Lyra let out a shuddering breath behind him. "You are a very convincing liar, Kale." "I had a good teacher," he said, stepping up to the interface. His fingers flew across the holographic keys. He pulled up the files Rico had flagged, the restricted appendices of the Medical Harmony Act. The data spilled out into the air, a waterfall of text and charts. Kale read, and the cold of the room seeped into his bones. "It's true," he said, his voice hollow. "Look at this." Longevity Therapy Recipient List. It's not just the council, it's the corporate heads, the military generals, the media moguls. They've been taking the compound for decades. Lyra pointed to a column of data on the left. Her finger stopped inches from the light, not touching it. And there is the cost. Donation quotas. They are not asking for volunteers. They are levying colonies. Sector 7 owes 4,000 liters of hemo-grade plasma annually. If they miss the quota, their medical supplies are cut off. They're farming us, Kyle said. They're turning the outer rim into a blood bank. He scrolled further, looking for the translation log. He needed to know why they had tried to kill him. He found his own personnel file. It was flagged with a blinking yellow warning. Security risk. He opened the attached audio file. It was a recording of him 2 weeks ago in the translation booth. He remembered the day. He had been tired, working late on a subclause about transport logistics. Voice of Kale, recording. Wait. This syntax doesn't match the public draft. The term biological waste is used here, but in the cipher key, it corresponds to unprocessed subjects. That's not waste. That's people. There's a discrepancy in the donor definition. The recording ended. I didn't even file a report, Kale whispered. I just muttered it to myself. I was talking to the empty room. The room was listening, Lyra said darkly. The AI flags keywords. You noticed the code. That was enough to sign your death warrant. Kale leaned back against the console. The weight of it was crushing. I was just doing my job. I was trying to be accurate. Accuracy is dangerous to people who build empires on lies, Lyra said. She moved to his side, her presence a warm, solid line against his arm. She noticed a small smear of blood on his lip. He had bitten it during the tension of the lock override. She reached up, her thumb hovering near the corner of his mouth. She didn't touch him, but the intent was there, a ghost of a caress. You are bleeding, she said softly. I'm fine, Kale said. He looked at her, at the fierce, terrifying beauty of her concern. Lyra, you don't have to keep doing this. You don't have to be the brave one all the time. I can see your hands shaking. Lyra flinched, pulling her hand back as if stung. She turned away, pretending to study a schematic of the ventilation shafts. My hands are steady. I am a surgical nurse. You're terrified, Kale said gently. And that's okay. I'm terrified too. She didn't answer for a moment. Then she let out a short, sharp exhale. I am not afraid of dying, Kale. I am afraid of failing. There is a difference. She adjusted the heavy thermal cape that draped over her shoulders, the one she had stolen from the pod to cover her scrubs. It billowed around her like a dark, dramatic shroud. Besides, she added, deflecting with a sudden jagged humor, if we are caught, at least I am dressed for the occasion. Do I look sufficiently villainous? Kale managed a weak smile. You look like a dramatic bat. I prefer medical professional with flair. She deadpans. Or perhaps avenging hematologist. Data transfer complete. The console chimed. Kale pulled the data crystal from the port. We have it. The quotas, the names, the staged terror plans, everything. Good, Lyra said. Now we... A siren cut her off. It wasn't the standard security alarm. It was a high-pitched, oscillating shriek that hurt the teeth. The holographic screens around them turned a violent, flashing crimson. Alert. Defective asset detected. Sector 42. Lyra froze. She looked at the screen. Her own face was rotating in the center of the display, overlaid with targeting reticles. Subject: Lyra Voss. Designation: genetically modified organism. Batch 7. Error: cognitive deviation, emotional inhibitor failure. Order, terminate on sight. Kale stared at the words. Genetically modified organism. Lyra? He asked. She backed away from the console, her face draining of what little color it had. I told you I was bonded. You said you had a contract, Kale said. You didn't say you were manufactured. Ethelgard Biotics doesn't hire nurses, she said, her voice brittle. They grow them, my species. We were wild once, but I was not born on a planet. I was decanted in a lab. They spliced us. They gave us the hunger for blood but removed the aggression. They gave us the ability to heal but took away the ability to disobey. She looked at her hands, as if they belonged to a stranger. The bounty said defective, she whispered. Because I am developing free will, the inhibitor chip in my cortex, it must be degrading. That is why I can feel fear. That is why I can choose. That's why you saved me, Kale said. Or maybe it was a glitch, she said bitterly. Maybe saving you was just a misfire in my programming. No, Kyle said firmly. That was you. That was your soul, Lyra, not a glitch. The blast doors at the far end of the hall hissed open. A squad of armored drones poured in, their weapons raised. Surrender! Asset 7! A voice boomed. We are cornered, Lyra said. She looked around desperately. Her eyes landed on a yellow panel on the wall marked Emergency Defibrillation Grid. Kale, cover your eyes, she screamed. She didn't wait for him to comply. She ripped the panel off the wall and grabbed the 2 heavy conductive handles inside. She slammed them together, shorting the circuit. Clear, she yelled. A massive arc of blue electricity exploded from the panel. It surged through the conductive floor tiles, overloading the delicate sensors of the server room. The lights blew out in a shower of sparks. The drones jerked and collapsed, their circuitry fried by the electromagnetic pulse. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the dying sparks and the faint bioluminescent glow of Lyra's veins. Move! She hissed, grabbing his hand. They ran through the smoke, stepping over the twitching chassis of the drones. They reached a maintenance hatch in the back of the vault and scrambled through, sealing it behind them just as the backup lights flickered on in the main hall. They emerged into a vast, silent space. It was an old observation dome, long abandoned, located at the very top of the spire. It was shaped like a cathedral, with high, vaulted ceilings. The windows were not glass, but stained glass holograms depicting the founding of the council. Heroic figures shaking hands, stylized stars, and script scrolling in golden light. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly ironic. They were standing in a shrine to unity while the government below plotted to enslave them. Lyra collapsed onto a dusty bench, her chest heaving. The use of the shock grid had drained her. She looked small in the cavernous room. Kyle sat beside her. He placed the data crystal in his pocket. We have the proof, he said. But we can't broadcast it from here. The blackout fried the transmitters. 36 hours, Lyra murmured. The vote is in 36 hours, and the file said they are planning the terror incident for tomorrow morning, a biological attack in the market district, to panic the undecided voters. We have to stop it, Kyle said. How? Lyra asked. She looked at him, and the despair in her eyes was heavy. I am a defective product, Kale. I am a tool that stopped working on... How can I stop a council? You are not a tool, Kale said. He turned on the bench to face her fully. How do you know? She demanded. Her voice cracked. How do you know that me sitting here wanting to be near you? How do you know that isn't just the bonding protocol? I was designed to bond to patients, to protect them, to obsess over them. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I am afraid," she admitted, the words tearing out of her. "I am afraid that my desire isn't my own. I looked at you in that lock, and I wanted to kiss you. And I don't know if that is love or if it is just code." Cale looked at her. He saw the doubt eating her alive. He knew he could comfort her. He could touch her. And she would let him. She was programmed to let him. And that was exactly why he couldn't. "Lyra," he said, his voice quiet and firm, "I will not take anything from you that isn't freely chosen." He leaned back, putting a foot of distance between them on the bench. "I want you to tell me to stop," Kyle said. "I want you to set a boundary, right now. Tell me what I cannot do." Lyra blinked, confused. "What?" "Exercise your agency," Kyle said. "Tell me to leave. Tell me not to touch you. Prove the code wrong." Lyra stared at him. Her breathing was shallow. She looked at the space between them. She looked at his hands, resting openly on his lap. "Do not," she started, her voice shaking. She swallowed. "Do not hold my hand." "Okay," Cale said. "I won't." "And do not tell me everything will be fine," she added, her voice growing stronger. "Because it might not be. I won't lie to you." Cale agreed. "And do not leave me," she whispered. The last one wasn't a boundary, it was a plea, but it was a plea she chose to make. "I won't," Cale said. Lyra let out a breath and her shoulders dropped. The tension that had held her rigid since the medical bay seemed to snap. She looked at him, and a genuine smile, tired, sad, but real, touched her lips. The relief in her face was profound. It was more intimate than any kiss could have been. She had drawn a line, and he had respected it. "Thank you," she said. A sound from the shadows made them both jump. Slow clapping echoed in the dome. "Touching," a dry voice said. "Truly, I haven't seen a display of ethical courtship like that since the Second Era." Lyra was on her feet instantly, a scalpel appearing in her hand from nowhere. A figure stepped out from behind a holographic projection of the first treaty. It was a woman, older, with graying hair and the sharp, intelligent eyes of a survivor. She wore the plain gray suit of a mid-level bureaucrat. "Relax, Nurse Voss," the woman said, holding up empty hands. "If I wanted you dead, I would have brought a squad, not a slow clap." "Who are you?" Cale demanded, standing up. "I am Alara Vance," the woman said, "Chief Aide to Counselor Hines, and I am the one who staged your shuttle crash." Cale froze. "You? You tried to kill me?" "I tried to hide you," Vance corrected. "I saw the hit order come down. I hacked the navigation computer to force a hard landing instead of a mid-air disintegration. It was messy, I admit. I didn't account for the nanites. That was someone else's play. Probably Ethelgard trying to protect their investment in the nurse." She looked at Lyra. "You're making a mess of my station, my dear." "We have the files," Lyra said, stepping in front of Cale. "We know about the quotas." "Digital files can be deleted," Vance said dismissively. "By the time you find a transmitter, the Council will have scrubbed the servers and replaced them with cat videos. You need physical evidence, hard copy, biological samples that can't be deep-faked." "Where?" Kyle asked. "There is a hospice moon," Vance said. "Sanctum 4. It's where they keep the spent donors, the ones who have been drained dry but are still technically alive. There is a paper archive there, a ledger of every leader taken. It's kept offline for security." Vance tossed a small keycard to Cale. He caught it. "There is a stealth shuttle in Bay 9, Vance said. "It has codes for the blockade. Get to the moon, get the ledger, and bring it back to the tribunal. That is the only way to stop the vote. Why are you helping us? Cale asked. Vance looked at the holographic stained glass, at the ideals of a council that no longer existed. Because I have a grandson in the Outer Rim, she said softly, and I don't want him to be a juice box for a politician. She looked back at them. Go. You have 10 minutes before the blackout lifts. Lyra and Cale ran. They reached Bay 9. The stealth shuttle was small, black, and angular. They scrambled inside, the cockpit smelling of new leather and lubricant. Lyra took the pilot's seat. Her hands flew over the controls, confident and sure. Strap in, she said. For real this time. The engines hummed to life. The bay doors opened, revealing the star-strewn void. We are leaving the scene of the crime, Lyra said as the shuttle lifted off the deck. We're coming back, Cale said, buckling his harness. With the truth. The shuttle shot out of the bay, accelerating hard. Through the rear viewport, Kyle watched the council spire shrink. It was a glittering needle of light against the darkness, beautiful and rot-infested. He looked over at Lyra. She was focused on the navigation, her profile illuminated by the instrument panel. She was a defective asset, a monster, a fugitive, and she was the most real thing he had ever known. She glanced at him, catching his stare. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. They both knew the truth now. Falling for each other made them vulnerable. It gave the enemy a target. It made them easier to destroy. But as the stars stretched into streaks of light around them, Cale knew it also made them impossible to stop. Sanctum 4 was not a moon designed for the living. It was a silent gray sphere orbiting a gas giant, its surface coated in a fine powdery dust that drifted eternally like snow. The dust was industrial ash, the fallout from the orbital incinerators that processed the medical waste of a dozen systems. But from the viewport of the stealth shuttle, it possessed a haunting, sterile beauty. Kalen Thorne watched the ash settle on the reinforced glass of the landing dome. The silence here was different from the medical bay or the data vault. It was the silence of a tomb. Atmospheric pressure is stabilizing, Lyra Voss said from the pilot's seat. Her voice was tight, strained. She flipped a sequence of switches with efficient, jerky movements. We are docked at the service airlock of the Northern Hospice Wing. Sensors show minimal power usage. Life support is on standby. Which means no heat, Rico muttered from the jump seat behind them. The young hacker had scrambled aboard the shuttle at the last second in Part 3, refusing to be left on the station with a bounty on his head and a target on his back. He was currently hugging his knees, looking pale. Why do we always go to the places that look like the opening scene of a horror vid? Because the truth is rarely stored in a ballroom. Rico, Lyra said. She stood up, bracing herself against the console. Cale noticed the slight tremor in her legs. She masked it quickly, grabbing her medical kit. Grab the thermal lamps, she ordered, and keep your comms on a secure frequency. This facility is supposed to be automated, but if Vance was right, there are things here the Council wants to keep hidden. They suited up in heavy excursion coats found in the shuttle's locker. Cale checked the charge on the stun baton he had taken from the station armory. He wasn't a soldier, but the weight of the weapon in his hand felt reassuring. They cycled the airlock and stepped into the hospice. The air smelled of stale lavender and ozone. The corridors were vast, curved tunnels of white polymer, lit only by the faint dying glow of emergency strips along the floor. Through the high, arched windows, the gray light of the moon filtered in, casting long skeletal shadows across the empty nursing stations. Where is the archive? Cale whispered, his voice swallowed by the damp acoustics. Sub-level 4, Lyra said, checking her wrist comp. The Black Archive. It is listed on the schematics as geological storage, but the power draw is consistent with a server farm. They moved deeper into the facility. As they crossed the threshold into the West Wing, the air suddenly felt heavy. Cale's stomach lurched, a sensation of weightlessness followed immediately by a crushing pressure. Then normalcy. He stumbled, grabbing the wall. What was that? Gravity fluctuation, Lyra said, scanning the walls with a handheld tricorder. This wing is derelict. The plating in the floor is misaligned. It got worse as they walked. The gravity didn't just fluctuate, it stuttered. Dust motes floating in the air would freeze in place, then accelerate violently. The sound of their footsteps echoed a fraction of a second after their boots hit the floor. Time dilation, Kyle realized, looking at his hand. He waved it, and the motion blurred, leaving a visual trail that lasted a heartbeat too long. They must have used experimental shielding on this wing, something that bends localized space-time to preserve volatile samples. Great, Rico squeaked. So not only is it a haunted hospital, but it's also a haunted hospital where time is broken. I saw a shadow move back there. I swear it moved before I looked at it. There are no ghosts. Rico, Lyra said, stepping through a patch of distortion that made her image ripple like water. Just echoes. You don't know that, Rico argued, his voice rising in pitch. This place is a warehouse for the dead. Millions of donors bled dry. You think they just left quietly? I bet the walls are bleeding. I bet if I open a door, a little girl in a white dress is going to ask me to play. Lyra stopped. She turned to look at him, her wine-dark eyes catching the low light. She looked exhausted, her skin paler than usual, but her wit was still razor-sharp. Rico, she said dryly, if ghosts exist, especially in a council facility, they are not playing. They are probably filing paperwork to complain about the afterlife conditions. Keep moving. Cale suppressed a smile, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. He watched Lyra closely. She was shivering. It wasn't just the cold. She was moving with a deliberate economy of motion, conserving energy. They reached the blast doors of the archive. The locking mechanism was old, physical rather than digital, a heavy wheel that required torque. Together, Kyle said. He and Lyra gripped the cold metal. Even with her enhanced strength, it was a struggle. They heaved, muscles straining, until the seal cracked with a groan of escaping air. The room beyond was not a server farm. It was a library. Rows of physical ledgers, bound in synthetic leather, lined the shelves. In the center of the room, a massive crystalline structure pulsed with a slow, blue rhythm. It looked like a stalagmite made of sapphire, growing out of the floor. The ledger, Lyra whispered. Vance was right. It is not digital. It is a memory crystal. It records intention and biological data directly. Rico immediately went to the crystal, pulling out his interface cables. I need to find a port. This tech is archaic, pre-unification. While Rico worked, Cale pulled a ledger from the nearest shelf. He opened it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and volumes. Sector, Orion 7. Colony, New Hope. Subject, 8940 Alpha. Age, 12. Donation. Volume, 2 liters. Status, critical. Compensation, water filtration unit for sector. Cale felt bile rise in his throat. He flipped the pages, thousands of names. Civic wellness, he read aloud, his voice shaking. That's what the brochure said. Participate in civic wellness, build a better future. They traded basic survival needs, water, medicine, heat, for blood. It is not just trade, Lyra said. She was standing by a shelf labeled high yield. She held a file in her hand. Look at this. These are entire communities. They didn't just take volunteers. They created economic droughts to force compliance. They poisoned the water tables so the colonists had to trade plasma for filters. Kyle found a small data chip tucked into the back of a ledger. It was labeled Whistleblower, Dr. Eris. He slotted it into his handheld reader. A hologram flickered to life. A tired-looking man in a lab coat, speaking in a hurried whisper. If you are finding this, I am likely dead. My name is Dr. Eris. I was the lead researcher on the Harmony Project. It was supposed to be a cure, a universal immunity booster. But Ethelgard twisted it. The nanites. They aren't just medical. They are receivers. They respond to a specific frequency. When activated, they override the amygdala. They suppress fear. They suppress dissent. They make the subject pliable. And the council plans to trigger a mass activation during the vote. They have staged a terrorist attack using a stolen hemivore transport to release a biological agent in the plaza. The panic will justify the activation. They will enslave the mind of every citizen to save them. The message ended. Mind control, Rico whispered, looking up from the crystal. Literal mind control. We have the proof, Kale said. Rico, can you copy the crystal? No, Rico said, frustrated. It's bio-locked. I can't copy it. We have to take the physical core, the whole crystal drive, but it needs a specific interface to play back, the kind they only have at the High Council. Then we take it, Lyra said. She reached for the crystal, but her hand spasmed. She dropped the file she was holding. Her knees buckled. Kyle was there instantly. He caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently against the metal shelving. Lyra. She was trembling violently now. Her skin was ice cold to the touch, and the iridescent veins in her neck were dull, gray lines. I am fine, she gasped, trying to push him away. Just low blood sugar. Don't lie to me, Kale said, his voice fierce. He grabbed her wrist, checking her pulse. It was erratic, thready. You haven't fed since the crash. You've been burning calories at 4 times the human rate to keep us alive. He looked at her medical kit. Where is your supply? Lyra turned her head away, shame coloring her cheeks. I have 1 pack left. I was saving it. Saving it for what? For if you got hurt, she whispered. My saliva, mixed with the synthetic. It accelerates healing. If we ran into trouble, I needed to be able to stabilize you. Kyle stared at her. She was starving herself, weakening her own body, just to keep a reserve for him. It was a level of self-sacrifice that broke his heart. He grabbed her bag and ripped it open. He found the last crimson pouch. It was warm from being close to the thermal pack. You are taking this, Kale commanded. Now. I can't open it, she admitted, her hands shaking too hard to grip the tab. Kyle didn't hesitate. He tore the tab off. He didn't hand it to her. He knelt beside her, supporting her head with one hand. Drink, he said softly. He held the pouch to her lips. She hesitated, looking at him with wide, fearful eyes, afraid of her own hunger, afraid of looking like a monster in front of him. It's medicine, Lyra, Kyle said, reading her thought. It's just medicine. Let me help you. She parted her lips. He tipped the pouch, controlling the flow. She drank, at first tentatively, then with a desperate, primal need. Kyle watched her, not with revulsion but with reverence. He wiped a drop from her chin with his thumb. This wasn't a horror scene. It was an act of service. It was intimacy without ownership. He was keeping her alive, just as she had kept him alive. When the pouch was empty, she slumped back against his chest, the trembling slowly subsiding. The color began to return to her cheeks. and the veins in her neck flared with renewed light. "Better?" Kyle asked. "Yes." She breathed. She didn't move away. She stayed there, leaning against him in the quiet of the archive. "We need to get the crystal out," Kale said, but he didn't move yet. "Wait," Lyra said. She stood up, using his shoulder for support. She pulled him toward a small supply closet off the main room. "The extraction tool. It's in here." They stepped into the cramped space. It was barely big enough for two people. Shelves of sterile gauze and surgical tools pressed in on them. Lyra found the tool, a laser cutter, but she didn't turn back to the door. She stood facing Kale, inches away. The air in the closet was still and warm. She looked up at him. The feed had restored her vitality, and with it, the intensity of her presence. She smelled of the synthetic plasma, metallic and sweet, and her own scent of rain and ozone. She took a step closer. Her chest brushed his coat. She inhaled deeply, her eyes fluttering shut. "You are so warm," she whispered. "Humans are so warm." It was a boundary line. They both knew it. The hunger in her voice wasn't just for food. It was a desperate need for connection, for life, for something to fill the hollowness that her engineered existence had carved out. Kale's heart hammered. He wanted to close the gap. He wanted to wrap his arms around her and never let go. But he remembered the promise in the dome. "Lyra," he said, his voice rough. "Do you want space?" She opened her eyes. They were dark, dilated, drowning in conflict. "Yes," she whispered. Then she leaned her forehead against his chest. "And also, no." She looked up at him, her expression raw. "I want to be close to you, but I am afraid I will hurt you. I am afraid I will take too much." "We choose a third option," Kale said. He reached down and took her hand. He didn't just hold it. He interlaced their fingers, palm to palm, a lock that was firm and grounding. He squeezed, hard enough to be felt through the haze of her instincts. "This is the anchor," Kale said. "You hold on to this. As long as we are holding hands, we are equals. You aren't taking, and I'm not giving. We are just here." Lyra looked at their joined hands. She squeezed back, her grip crushing in its strength, but careful, desperately careful. "Consent," she murmured, testing the word like a prayer. "Okay." She looked up at him, and the tension in her face broke into a fierce, determined clarity. "Let's get the crystal," she said. They stepped back out into the archive. Rico was waiting, bouncing on his heels. "Okay, lovebirds. Not to interrupt the moment, but the motion sensors just tripped in the hallway. We have company." A heavy thud shook the blast doors, then the hiss of a plasma torch cutting through the metal. "Mercenaries," Lyra said, her voice turning cold and tactical. "Ethelgard. They tracked the shuttle." "How many?" Kale asked, raising his stun baton. "Too many for a fair fight," Lyra said. She grabbed the laser cutter and slashed through the base of the sapphire crystal. It broke free with a chime-like resonance. She tossed it to Kale. "Keep this safe," she ordered. "Rico, the ventilation shaft behind the shelf. Go!" The blast doors exploded inward. Smoke filled the room. Figures in matte black tactical armor poured in, their weapons raised. "Target sighted," a voice barked. "Secure the asset. Kill the witnesses. Run!" Lyra screamed. She shoved a heavy shelf over, crushing the first two mercenaries beneath a landslide of ledgers. They bolted toward the rear exit, sprinting down a service corridor that led toward the biodomes. Laser fire chewed up the walls around them. Kale felt the heat of a bolt graze his shoulder, smelling singed fabric. "Into the garden," Lyra yelled. They burst through a set of double doors into the biodome. It was a massive glass-enclosed greenhouse filled with towering, genetically modified flora from a dozen worlds. The air was humid and thick with the scent of wet earth. But the biodome was part of the derelict wing. As soon as they stepped onto the metal walkway, the gravity failed. "Zero G!" Rico yelled, floating upward as his momentum carried him off the floor. The mercenaries burst in behind them. They were prepared for standard gravity. The sudden shift threw them into chaos. They flailed, their shots going wild, shattering the massive glass panels of the dome above. Shards of glass, razor-sharp and glittering like diamonds, began to float through the air, creating a deadly, suspended minefield. Vines, freed from gravity, uncoiled like slow-motion ribbons, whipping through the space. "Kyle, stay low," Lyra commanded. She kicked off the railing, launching herself into the air. In zero gravity, she was in her element. She didn't just move. She flowed. She twisted in midair, dodging a burst of plasma fire by spinning around a floating palm frond. A mercenary locked onto her, raising a rifle. Lyra didn't look at him. She closed her eyes for a split second. Thump, 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 thump. She could hear it, the rapid, pounding rhythm of his heart. She could feel the pressure building in his trigger finger before the muscle twitched. She sensed the spike in his blood pressure as he exhaled to fire. She moved before he pulled the trigger. She tucked her knees and rotated, the plasma bolt passing harmlessly through the space where her chest had been. She landed on the ceiling, using her magnetic boots, and pushed off again, becoming a blur of kinetic energy. She slammed into the mercenary not with a weapon but with precision. She struck the nerve cluster in his neck. He went limp, drifting away like a rag doll. "How is she doing that?" Rico screamed, paddling through the air behind a large fern. "She's listening to them," Kyle realized, watching in awe. "She's predicting their movement by their pulse." Lyra was a storm. She disarmed a second mercenary, using his own momentum to send him crashing into a floating cloud of glass shards. She didn't kill them. She dismantled them. "Kale, the exit!" she shouted, pointing to the airlock at the far end of the dome. Kale grabbed a hanging vine and pulled himself forward, clutching the crystal drive to his chest. He kicked off a tree trunk, soaring through the debris. One final mercenary blocked the door. He raised a heavy cannon, aiming directly at Kale. "No!" Lyra screamed. She was too far away to reach him, but she wasn't too far to be terrifying. She let out a sound, not a scream, but a subsonic hiss, a frequency used by her species to stun prey. The mercenary flinched, his hands clamping over his ears instinctively. It was enough. Kale slammed into him, driving the stun baton into the man's chest plate. The mercenary convulsed and floated away. Kale hit the door release. The airlock cycled open. He grabbed Rico by the back of his coat and hauled him inside. Lyra followed, diving through the closing gap just as the remaining mercenaries opened fire. The door sealed. They were safe. They collapsed on the floor of the airlock, gasping for breath. The gravity here was normal. The return of weight felt crushing. "Is everyone okay?" Kyle asked, checking the crystal. It was intact, pulsing with its steady blue light. "I think I threw up in my mouth," Rico groaned from the floor. "Twice." Lyra sat up, brushing glass dust from her hair. She was bruised and her uniform was torn, but she was alive. She looked at Kale, and a fierce pride burned in her eyes. "You fought," she said. "I had a good example," Kale replied. They made their way back to the shuttle. The launch was hurried, Lyra pushing the engines to the red line to break orbit before the Ethelgard pursuit ship could lock on. As they broke the atmosphere, leaving the gray, dusty moon behind, Kale looked at the crystal in his lap. "We have it," he said. "The ledger, the names, the proof. Now we just have to deliver it, Lyra said, setting the nav computer for the capital. To the wolf's den. She engaged the autopilot and turned her chair to face him. The cockpit was dim, lit only by the starlight and the leaking seal of the skylight above them. A thin stream of condensation dripped from the seal, catching the light like a tear. They will be waiting for us, Lyra said softly. The council, the contractor. They will have the entire fleet between us and that tribunal. I know, Cale said. We might not survive this, she said. It wasn't pessimism, it was an assessment. We might not, Kyle agreed. He reached out and took her hand again. Her skin was cool, her grip solid. But the truth survives. That's the job. That's the translation. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't look like a nurse, or a vampire, or a weapon. She looked like a woman who had found something worth dying for. Then let's make it count, she whispered. We don't just survive, Kyle. We expose the lie, we burn it down, even if it costs us everything. She squeezed his hand, and the ghost of a giggle, soft, dangerous, and free, escaped her lips. Stay awake, translator, she said. I'm not sleeping, he promised. The shuttle streaked into hyperspace, a single point of light vanishing into the void, carrying the weapon that would break the world. The shuttle descent into the capital city was not the stealth insertion they had hoped for. It was a dive into a cauldron. Below them, the surface of Prime City was a sprawling grid of illuminated ambition, divided strictly by altitude. The spires of the High Council pierced the clouds, wrapped in the soft golden glow of wealth and atmospheric shielding. Down below, in the shadowed canyons of the streets, the light was harsher, red flares, flashing police strobes, and the erratic neon of a populace on the edge of a riot. Kalen Thorne steered the shuttle manually, keeping them below the primary traffic lanes to avoid the automated scanners. Beside him, Lyra Voss watched the view screen with a grim intensity. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Look at the screens, she said, pointing to the massive holographic billboards that clung to the sides of the skyscrapers. They were everywhere, 500 feet tall. Projected in high definition was the face of Counselor Hines. His expression was one of paternal concern, his voice booming across the city on a synchronized audio loop. Citizens, the projection intoned. The Medical Harmony Act is not just legislation, it is survival. The threat of biological terrorism from the hemivore insurgents is real. We must unite. We must accept protection. Compliance is safety. They are framing us, Lyra said, her voice hollow. They are calling us terrorists before we have even fired a shot. Standard playbook, Rico said from the back, tapping furiously on his datapad. Create a monster, then sell the cage. I'm picking up chatter on the police bands. They've mobilized the riot squads. The vote is starting in 2 hours. The crowd outside the council hall is estimated at 40,000. Kyle set the shuttle down on a private landing pad in the lower commercial district, using an override code provided by Alara Vance. As the engines cooled, whining down into silence, the reality of what they were about to do settled over them like a physical weight. We need to get to the broadcast tower, Kyle said, unbuckling his harness. It's 3 miles from here. We can't take the shuttle any closer without triggering the anti-air defenses. We walk, Lyra said. She stood up, pulling the hood of her borrowed civilian coat up. It was a rough, woolen garment, meant to blend in. But on her, it looked like a costume. Rico looked at her and winced. Okay, we have a problem. You look like a monk who is about to assassinate an emperor. It's too suspicious. Lyra adjusted the fabric, trying to hide the pale luminosity of her skin and the distinctive iridescent veins at her throat. I am trying to be inconspicuous. You are a 6-foot-tall vampire with eyes that reflect light, Rico pointed out. Inconspicuous left the building when you were decanted. Just keep your head down, Kyle said, handing Lyra a pair of dark spectrum goggles. Wear these. They'll hide your eyes. Rico, you have the path? I have the service tunnels mapped, Rico said, shouldering his heavy pack of gear. But we have to surface for the last half-mile. The tower is surrounded by a security cordon. They exited the shuttle into the humid, restless air of the city. The noise was the first thing that hit them, a low, thrumming roar of thousands of voices chanting in the distance, punctuated by the sharp wail of sirens. They moved quickly through the back alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfares. But as they got closer to the council district, the crowds became unavoidable. The streets were packed with protesters. Some held signs demanding health care for all, while others, whipped into a frenzy by the propaganda, carried banners that read, "Purge the blood thieves." Cale stayed close to Lyra, his body acting as a subtle shield. He could feel the tension radiating off her. Every time a stranger looked their way, she stiffened, her hand drifting toward the pocket where she kept her scalpel. They turned a corner and ran straight into a bottleneck. A group of citizens had gathered around a public news terminal. On the screen, a grainy video was playing, fake footage of a hemovore attacking a child. Monsters, a woman in the crowd spat, clutching her bag. They should hunt them all down. I heard they drink the adrenaline, a man replied, his face twisted in disgust. They scare you first so the blood tastes better. Lyra flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of her jaw, but Cale saw it. He saw the way she shrank inside the coat, the shame warring with the anger. She was surrounded by people who had been taught to hate her biology, people who would cheer if she were dragged away in chains. Kyle stepped in, placing a hand on the small of her back. He didn't push her. He just let the weight of his hand rest there, a grounding presence. Don't listen, he murmured, his voice low enough that only her enhanced hearing could catch it. It's noise. It's not true. It is what they believe, she whispered back. How do you save people who want you dead, Kyle? By showing them they're wrong, he said. Come on. He guided her through the gap in the crowd. As they passed, the woman who had spoken turned. She caught a glimpse of Lyra's pale chin beneath the hood, the unnatural stillness of her movement. Hey, the woman shouted. You, look at me. Lyra froze. Rico stepped in, loud and obnoxious. Back off, lady. My friend has photosensitivity syndrome. You want to pay her medical bills because I can send you the invoice right now. He waved his data pad in her face, displaying a confusing array of scrolling numbers. The woman blinked, taken aback by the sudden bureaucratic aggression. Move along, Rico muttered, herding Cale and Lyra away. Nothing to see here but expensive genetic defects. They hurried down the street, ducking into the service entrance of an automated laundry facility that bordered the tower grounds. Once inside the safety of the steam-filled room, Rico let out a breath. That was close, he said. He looked at Lyra, who was adjusting her hood again. Congrats, Voss. With the goggles and the ominous cloak, you are now officially a fashionable criminal. Very avant-garde. Lyra didn't smile. She took off the goggles, her dark wine eyes flashing. I am not hiding because I am ashamed. Rico, I am hiding because if I kill someone in self-defense, we lose the moral high ground. Right, Kyle said. Let's focus. The broadcast tower. The tower loomed above them, a spire of black metal and glass that pierced the sky. It was the central node for the entire planetary network. If they could hijack the transmitter at the peak, they could override every screen on the planet. "We have Vance's codes," Kale said, pulling up the schematic. "Service entrance is on the north side, level 10. They navigated the perimeter, slipping past the distracted perimeter guards who were more focused on the growing riots than the shadows near the wall. They reached the service door. Kale punched in the access code, 7419 Alpha. The light turned green. The door slid open, but the corridor beyond was not empty. Standing in the center of the hallway, flanked by 4 armored tactical officers, was Alara Vance. The aide looked terrible. Her lip was split, and one eye was swollen shut. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. Behind her stood a man in a sleek white suit that looked like it cost more than the shuttle they had flown in on. "I am sorry," Vance rasped. Her voice was broken. They were waiting. They knew. The man in the white suit stepped forward. He had a face that was handsome in a synthetic, manufactured way. He smiled, and it was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, "and Asset 7, we have been expecting you. I am Director Silas Vane, head of asset retrieval for Ethelgard Biotics." Lyra stepped in front of Kale instantly, her body dropping into a combat crouch. "Let her go." Vane laughed softly. "Oh, the defective product speaks. How charming. But we are not here to negotiate with property. 7. We are here to make a deal with the human." He turned his gaze to Kale. "Mr. Thorne," Vane said smoothly, "you are in a very precarious position. You are harboring a fugitive, stealing corporate data, and trespassing on government property. That is a life sentence in the cryo prison. However, Ethelgard is a pragmatic company. We appreciate talent." Vane gestured to the open door behind him. "Walk away," Vane said. "Give us the nurse, give us the drive, and you walk out of here with a full pardon. We will even throw in a consultancy contract, 3 million credits a year. You can live in the high spire. You can forget this messy little adventure ever happened." Kyle looked at Vane. Then he looked at Vance, beaten and bound. Finally, he looked at Lyra. She wasn't looking at Vane. She was looking at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying resolve. "Take it," she whispered. Kyle blinked. "What?" "Take the deal, Kyle," she urged, her voice shaking. "They will kill you if you don't. I can handle the reconditioning. I can go back to the lab. But I cannot watch you die." She meant it. Every fiber of her being was screaming for him to survive. She was willing to trade her existence for his life. It was the ultimate expression of the love she had been engineered to simulate. But this time, it was agonizingly real. "Lyra," Kale said, "please," she begged, tears gathering in her eyes. "Don't be a hero, just live." Kale looked back at Vane. The director was checking his watch. "Bored." "I refuse," Kale said. Vane sighed. "Disappointing and foolish." "I'm not done," Kale said. He turned to Lyra. He didn't touch her. He stood 2 feet away, respecting the space between them even now. "I'm not making this choice for you," Kale said fiercely. "I'm not trading you like currency. And I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself to save me. That's not a partnership. That's martyrdom." He locked eyes with her. "What do you want, Lyra?" he asked. "Not for me. Not for the mission. For you. Do you want to go with them?" Lyra looked at the director. She looked at the shackles on Vance's wrists. She remembered the cold of the lab, the needle in her spine, the years of having no voice, no choice, no name. She looked at Kyle, the man who had asked permission to hold her hand. "I want," she started. her voice trembling. She inhaled sharply. I want to be free. She said it louder. I choose freedom. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Love wasn't about dying for someone. It was about fighting to stand beside them. Then let's take it, Kale said. Rico, Lyra screamed. The lights! Rico, who had been cowering behind a crate, slammed his fist onto his datapad. Blackout protocol engaged. The corridor plunged into darkness. Lyra moved. She didn't attack Vane. She grabbed Kale and Vance, pulling them sideways as the tactical team opened fire. The muzzle flashes lit up the hallway in strobe light bursts. Up, Lyra yelled. To the stairwell. They sprinted toward the emergency access. Lyra kicked the door open, the metal buckling under her strength. They scrambled onto the stairs just as the bullets chewed up the frame behind them. They're blocking the elevators, Rico shouted, panting as they climbed. We have to take the maintenance ladders inside the antenna shaft. That's 40 stories, Kyle yelled. Better than being shot, Lyra countered. They burst into the central shaft of the tower. It was a dizzying vertical tunnel of steel cables, humming machinery, and wind. The roar of the transmitter array above was deafening. Climb, Lyra ordered. They began the ascent. It was a brutal lung-burning nightmare. Below them, drones began to rise from the darkness, their red optical sensors scanning the gloom. Stun rounds, Kale shouted, dodging as a blue bolt of energy sizzled past his ear. He fired back with his stolen stun baton, clipping a drone's rotor. It spun out of control, crashing into the wall. They climbed higher, hand over hand, swinging through the hanging cables. The wind whipped at them, cold and biting. Suddenly, the massive screens visible through the gaps in the tower walls changed. The vote had started. The image of Councillor Hines appeared, larger than life. Citizens, Hines boomed. The time for debate is over. I am enacting the emergency protocols of the Harmony Act immediately. Below, in the square, a strange sound rose. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a scream. It was a sudden, terrifying silence. Kale looked down through the grating. The crowd, thousands strong, had stopped moving. They stood perfectly still, their faces turned upward toward the screens. What is happening? Kale asked. The nanites. Lyra gasped, clutching the ladder rung. Vane didn't wait for the biological attack. He triggered them remotely. He just activated the compliance protocol. Kyle squinted. Even from this height, he could see the change. The chaotic, angry movement of the riot had been replaced by a grid of stillness. People's eyes were glazing over, their postures slack. They looked like dolls waiting for instructions. They are erasing them, Lyra said, horror in her voice. They are turning off their free will. We have to stop it, Kale said. We have to get to the transmitter. We won't make it in time, Rico yelled from below. The signal is locking them down. I can break the lock, Lyra said. She stopped climbing. She reached into her medical bag and pulled out a bulky, jury-rigged device she had assembled from the stolen hospital gear. It looked like a radio grafted onto a defibrillator. What is that? Kale asked. A medical frequency jammer, Lyra said. I tuned it to the nanite control frequency. It creates a localized discordant pulse. It wakes them up. She braced herself against the ladder and slammed the activation switch. A visible ripple of distortion shouted from the device. It wasn't sound. It was pure electromagnetic force. Down in the square, the effect was immediate. The people closest to the tower stumbled. They blinked, shaking their heads as if waking from a deep sleep. Confusion rippled through the crowd. The silence broke. It's working, Kyle shouted. Keep going. They scrambled up the last 50 feet, bursting through the hatch onto the transmitter deck. It was a platform open to the sky, dominated by the massive crystal focusing lens of the planetary broadcast array. The wind here was ferocious, tearing at their clothes. "Rico, the drive!" Kyle yelled. Rico fumbled with his pack, pulling out the crystalline ledger from the moon. He ran to the central console and slammed it into the port. "I'm in!" Rico shouted, his fingers flying across the keys. "Bypassing the firewall. Okay, I have control of the feed. Ready to upload on your mark." "Do it," Kyle said. "Wait," Rico said, his face paling. "I'm getting an error. Biometric decryption required." "The drive. It's locked to the Ethelgard genetic marker. It needs a key." "What kind of key?" Kale asked. "Biosample," Lyra said, stepping forward. "Blood." She looked at the console. There was a small, needle-lined receptacle next to the drive port. It was designed to accept a drop of blood from a verified Ethelgard executive, or a verified Ethelgard product. Lyra stared at the needle. She froze. It was a trigger, a trauma response deeper than thought. She had spent years in a lab, being strapped down, having needles inserted into her spine, her arms, her neck. Her blood had been the currency of her slavery. Now, to free the world, she had to give it again. She held out her wrist, but her hand was shaking so violently she couldn't steady it over the interface. She pulled back, gasping, panic seizing her chest. "I can't," she choked out. "I can't do it, not again." The drones were cresting the edge of the platform. Laser fire began to strafe the deck. Kale moved to her. He didn't grab her wrist. He didn't force her hand down. He stood beside her, blocking the wind, blocking the view of the incoming drones. "Lyra," he said softly. "I can't be used again," she sobbed. "I can't be a supply." "You aren't a supply," Kale said. "You are the key. You are the one turning the lock. You are the one burning them down." He held out his hands, palms up, a platform, a support. "Let me steady you," he said. "I won't force you. I'll just hold you." Lyra looked at him. She looked at his hands, the hands that had held hers in the hospital, in the tunnel, in the archive, the hands that had never taken without asking. She nodded, a sharp, jerky motion. She laid her trembling wrist into his open palms. Kale's grip was firm but gentle. He didn't push. He just provided the stability she couldn't find in herself. He anchored her. With his help, she lowered her wrist. The needles pierced her skin. Lyra hissed, but she didn't pull away. The interface flashed green. Identity confirmed. Asset 7. Access granted. "Upload!" Lyra screamed, pulling her arm back, blood welling on her pale skin. Rico hit the enter key. Every screen in the city, every billboard, every data pad, every hall monitor flickered. The face of Counselor Hines vanished. In its place, the footage from the Moon Archive played. The lists of dead donors scrolled by in rapid fire. The video of the stage terror planning played. The contracts signed by Hines and Vane, trading colony water rights for longevity serum, appeared in high resolution. And then, the audio Kale had found, the whistleblower doctor explaining the mind control. The city went silent for a heartbeat. Then, it erupted. The crowd in the square didn't just wake up, they exploded. The confusion turned to rage. The riot lines broke. The police, seeing the truth on the screens, lowered their shields. "We did it!" Rico yelled, dancing a jig behind the console. "We actually did it!" Kyle turned to Lyra. She was clutching her wrist, staring at the screens, a look of awe on her face. She had done it. She was free. "Lyra!" Kyle said, reaching for her. She turned to him, a smile breaking across her face, radiant, exhausted, and beautiful. "Kale," she said. Then she jerked. A dull thwack sounded over the wind. Lyra's eyes went wide. She looked down. A silver dart, fletched with Ethelgard colors, was buried in her shoulder. "No," Kale whispered. It wasn't a bullet. It was a containment dart. High-dose neurotoxin designed to drop a hemivore instantly for transport. Lyra's legs gave out. Kale lunged, catching her before she hit the deck. He fell to his knees, cradling her head. "Lyra! Lyra! Stay with me!" Her eyes were rolling back, the wine-dark irises clouding over. Her body went limp, heavy and cold in his arms. Did we win?" she slurred, her voice barely a breath. "Yes," Kyle said, tears blurring his vision. "Yes, we won. You won. Stay awake. Lyra, please, stay awake." "Tired," she whispered. Her hand fumbled for his, her fingers weak. "Held my hand." Her hand slipped from his grasp. Her chest stopped moving. Above them, a heavy Ethelgard transport ship blocked out the sun, its spotlight pinning them to the deck in a blinding column of white light. "Secure the asset," a voice boomed from the ship. Kale screamed her name, a sound of raw, tearing grief as the storm of lights descended upon them. Consciousness returned to Lyra Voss not as a flood of data, but as a dull, throbbing ache in her shoulder and a heaviness in her limbs. The sharp, metallic taste of neurotoxin still coated her tongue, a bitter reminder of the dart that had dropped her on the broadcast tower. She blinked, expecting the harsh interrogative glare of a containment cell or the sterile white of a laboratory ceiling. She expected to see Silas Vane's face, smiling that shark-like smile, ready to begin the reconditioning process that would wipe her mind clean of the last few days. Instead, she saw a ceiling of rusted corrugated metal, crisscrossed with pipes that dripped condensation into buckets with a rhythmic plink. 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 The light was low, a warm, amber glow coming from a portable heater in the corner. The air smelled of old dust, ozone, and strong, synthetic coffee. She tried to move, and the stiffness in her muscles protested. She was lying on a cot, covered by a scratchy wool blanket. Her arm, the one she had cut to activate the bio-lock, was bandaged with professional precision. She turned her head, sitting in a folding chair next to the cot, slumped forward with his head resting on his arms near her hip. Was Kalen Thorne. He was asleep. His coat was torn at the shoulder. His face was smudged with soot from the tower climb, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He looked exhausted, ordinary, and utterly ruined by the night's events, and his hand was firmly clamped around hers. Even in sleep, his grip was tight, his fingers interlaced with hers, resting on the edge of the mattress. It was a mirror image of how they had met. Only the roles were reversed. She was the patient, vulnerable and broken. He was the vigil keeper, refusing to let go. A small, weak smile touched Lyra's lips. She squeezed his fingers. A faint pressure. Kale jerked awake instantly. He sat up, blinking rapidly, his hand instinctively tightening on hers before his eyes found her face. "You're awake," he breathed, his voice rough with fatigue. "I woke up beside a human translator," Lyra whispered, her voice raspy. He snored softly and refused to let go of my hand. Kale let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He rubbed his face with his free hand, but he didn't release her. "I don't snore." "You do," she teased weakly. "It sounds like a malfunctioning thruster." She looked at their joined hands. "Still holding on?" "I told you," Kale said, his expression sobering. "I'm not going anywhere. How do you feel?" "Like I was shot with a tranquilizer dart meant for a rhinoceros," Lyra admitted. She sat up slowly, wincing as the room spun. "Where are we?" "Underground clinic," Kale explained, helping her prop herself up against the wall. "Sector 9, The medics here are, let's say, not fond of the council. They patched you up. The neurotoxin is out of your system, but you've been out for 12 hours. 12 hours? Lyra's eyes widened. The broadcast. Did it work? Before Cale could answer, the heavy blast door at the far end of the room creaked open. Rico burst in, carrying a tray of food and a data pad that was buzzing incessantly. Work? Rico exclaimed, kicking the door shut behind him. Voss, you didn't just break the news, you broke the sky. He set the tray down on the cot, bowls of steaming protein broth, and shoved the data pad at her. Look at this, Rico said, his eyes bright with manic energy. The council hall is a smoking ruin, figuratively speaking. The riot police refused to fire on the crowd after the video played. The governor of the Orion sector just declared independence. 3 orbital habitats have severed their links with the capital. It's chaos out there. Beautiful, beautiful chaos. Lyra scanned the headlines scrolling across the screen. Council denies allegations. Ethelgard biotics under investigation. Hemivore hero vanishes. But they aren't going down quietly, Cale warned, taking the pad back. He swiped to a different channel. It was a council emergency feed. On the screen, a new narrative was being spun. The anchor, pale and serious, was speaking over grainy footage of Lyra and Cale on the tower. Reports confirm that the human diplomat Calen Thorne has been compromised, the anchor said. Sources indicate he is under the influence of a potent hemivore pheromone agent, effectively hypnotizing him into aiding the terrorist known as Asset 7. The council urges Mr. Thorne to surrender for medical treatment. He is a victim, not a traitor. Lyra stared at the screen. Hypnotized? She let out a dry, bitter laugh. They cannot conceive that a human would choose to help me. They have to invent a chemical excuse. It's smart, Kyle said grimly. They're offering me a life raft. If I come forward and say you brainwashed me, they grant me immunity. I go back to my life, and they paint you as the monster who seduced and destroyed a good man. It delegitimizes everything we uploaded. And if you don't? Lyra asked. Then I'm a co-conspirator, Cale said. And the hit squads keep coming. Vane has gone underground, Rico added, chewing on a ration bar. The contractor's ship vanished from the sensors an hour ago. But his mercenaries are still active. They're sweeping the Undercity. We can't stay here much longer. Lyra swung her legs over the edge of the cot. Her head swam, but she forced herself to focus. We cannot run. Kyle, if we run, the propaganda wins. They will control the narrative. They will say the archive was faked by terrorists. We need a venue, Cale said. Somewhere they can't silence us. Somewhere public. The Ring of Oaths, Lyra said. Rico choked on his ration bar. The Ring? That's neutral territory. It's a glorified antique store floating in the Lagrange Point. It is an independent judicial station, Lyra corrected. Founded before the council, its charter guarantees a hearing for any petitioner who can reach the central dais. The proceedings are broadcast on an analog frequency that cannot be jammed. It's also guarded by the Knights of the Void, Rico pointed out. They don't like tech, and they definitely don't like fugitives. It is our only chance, Lyra said. She looked at Cale. We have to testify, in the flesh. We have to verify the archive with the physical drive and show them that you are not hypnotized. Cale looked at her. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, but also the steel. She was asking to walk back into the fire. We leave in 10 minutes, Cale said. The journey to the Ring of Oaths was a study in tension. They secured passage on a cargo hauler smuggling unfiltered water to the outer rim, hiding in the crawlspace beneath the engine deck. The vibration of the thrusters rattled their teeth, and the heat was oppressive. Rico spent the first hour checking his social media feeds, which were exploding with mentions of his handle. "I'm trending," Rico whispered in awe, staring at the screen in the dark. "Look at this. Shadow Protocol is the #1 search term. People are making fan art of me. They gave me a cape. I don't even own a cape." He pulled a marker from his pocket and scribbled his signature on the bulkhead wall. "Gotta practice. The autograph line is going to be miles long." "Focus, Rico," Lyra murmured from the shadows. She was sharpening her scalpel, the rasp of metal on stone cutting through the engine drone. "You're just jealous because the media is calling you the vampire queen of death," Rico shot back. "It lacks nuance." Lyra deadpanned. "But it is accurate regarding my mood." They arrived at the Ring of Oaths 6 hours later. The station was a massive rotating wheel of stone and iron, starkly different from the sleek glass spires of the Capitol. It looked like a fortress from a forgotten age. As they disembarked in the hangar bay, they were immediately challenged, not by council security, but by the station's own militia, imposing figures in heavy, ceremonial armor wielding kinetic pikes. "Identify!" the captain barked. "Petitioners!" Cale said, stepping forward. He held up his hands. "I am Kalen Thorne. This is Lyra Voss. We claim the right of audience." The captain eyed them suspiciously. "The council has a bounty on your heads. Thorne, 50 million credits." Rico whistled low. 50. That's it? I feel insulted." The captain ignored him. He looked at Lyra. "And the hemivore." "She is the primary witness," Kale said. The captain hesitated, then nodded. "The ring is sanctuary. Surrender your weapons. You will be heard." They handed over their blasters. Lyra hesitated, then handed over her scalpel. As they walked through the grand concourse toward the tribunal chamber, the reality of their fame hit them. The station was crowded with refugees, traders, and travelers. When they were recognized, a ripple went through the crowd. Some recoiled, pulling their children back from Lyra. Others stared with awe. A young woman pushed through the line. She was holding a data pad, her eyes wide. She ran straight up to Rico. "Are you him?" she asked breathlessly. "The hacker from the broadcast?" Rico grinned, puffing out his chest. "That's me, sweetheart. The one and only. Shadow Protocol at your service. Do you want an autograph? A selfie?" The woman slapped him. It wasn't a hard slap, but it was sharp, stinging with frustration. "My brother is a guard at the tower," she snapped, tears in her eyes. "He lost his pension because of your blackout. He has 3 kids." She stormed off. Rico stood there, stunned, holding his cheek. The grin slid off his face. "Well," Lyra murmured, walking past him. "That is the price of fame. Rico, not everyone likes the rewrite." "I thought I was the hero," Rico muttered, rubbing his face. "You are," Lyra said, glancing back with a smirk. "But you are emotionally allergic to danger, and apparently to consequences. Welcome to the revolution. It is messy." They reached the tribunal hall. It was a vast circular amphitheater carved from gray asteroid rock. In the center stood a single podium of white marble. The seats rising around them were filled with holograms, representatives from the independent systems, the guilds, and the council itself. The air was heavy with the weight of judgment. "Kalen Thorne," a booming voice announced from the ceiling. "You stand before the galaxy. Speak." Kale walked to the podium. Lyra stood beside him, her head high, refusing to shrink under the gaze of 1,000 eyes. "We do not come to speak," Kale said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. "We come to show He placed the crystalline drive on the podium. Before he could activate it, a holographic pillar of light erupted in the center of the room. It resolved into the image of a man. Silas Vane. The director looked impeccable, sitting in what appeared to be a private stateroom on a starship. He was smiling. "Mr. Thorne," Vane said, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Please, let us not waste the tribunal's time with stolen fantasies." "Director Vane," Cale said coldly, "I'm surprised you showed your face." "I am a businessman." "Cale," Vane said, "I am here to offer a settlement. The council acknowledges that mistakes were made in the administration of the Harmony Act. We are willing to suspend the quotas. We are willing to open an independent inquiry." A murmur went through the holographic audience. It was a concession, a massive one. "All you have to do," Vane continued, his eyes locking onto Cale, "is destroy that drive and hand over the nurse. She is a proprietary asset who has malfunctioned. She needs to be decommissioned for the safety of the public." Cale felt Lyra stiffen beside him. This was the final trap. Vane was offering peace to the galaxy in exchange for Lyra's life. He was betting that the systems, tired of war and fear, would take the deal. "She is dangerous," Vane said, playing to the crowd. "She is a predator, but look at her. She is engineered to kill. Do you really want her walking free?" Cale looked at Lyra. He saw the doubt flickering in her wine-dark eyes. She was terrified that he would see the logic in it. One life for peace. Cale turned back to Vane. "She is not a predator," Cale said, his voice ringing out, "and she is not an asset." He stepped back, giving Lyra the floor. "Tell them," Cale said to her. Lyra stepped forward. She placed her hands on the marble. She looked into the camera that broadcasted to 100 worlds. "I was not born," Lyra began, her voice shaking slightly before finding its strength. "I was made. Ethelgard Biotics created my species 30 years ago, not to be soldiers, but to be scapegoats." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the final file, the one they hadn't uploaded yet, the technical schematics of her own creation. "They engineered us to need the synthetic blood they manufacture," Lyra said. "They created the supply, and then they created the demand. They made us look like monsters so you would fear us. And then they sold you the protection from the very thing they built." She uploaded the file. Schematics flooded the arena, DNA sequences, memos detailing the design of the predatory aesthetic to maximize public fear. "I am not a monster," Lyra said, her voice quiet but devastating. "I am a product line, and today, the product is recalling itself." The room erupted. The holograms shouted over each other. The evidence was irrefutable. It wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a manufacture of an entire enemy species for profit. Vane's smile faltered. For the first time, the shark looked afraid. "Cut the feed!" Vane shouted to someone off-screen. "Cut it now!" But the ring of oaths was analog. The signal held. "You are finished, Vane," Cale said. Vane's image flickered. "You think this is over? You think you can stop the momentum of history with a spreadsheet? We will burn you. Thorne, we will—" The connection was severed. Vane disappeared. The tribunal descended into chaos, but it was the chaos of truth breaking through the dam. In the confusion, Lyra pulled Cale back into the shadows of the archway. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. "It is done," she whispered. "They know. They know." Cale agreed. Lyra looked up at him. The crowd noise seemed to fade away. "Cale," she said, "I need to ask you something. Before we go back out there." "Anything. I am afraid," she admitted. "I have spent my whole life following orders. First Ethelgard's, then the hospitals, even escaping. I was following the imperative to survive." She looked at her hands. Now I am free, and it terrifies me. Because I love you. Cale went still. It was the first time she had said it out loud. I love you, she repeated, looking him in the eye. But I am afraid that if I love you fully, I will just be trading one handler for another. I am afraid I will become dependent on you to tell me who I am. Cale reached out. He took her face in his hands. Then we make a rule, Cale said fiercely. The door is always open and you can leave, Lyra, at any time. You can walk away and I won't chase you, I won't hunt you, I won't ask you to stay for me. Lyra searched his face, looking for the lie. You wouldn't chase me, she asked. Never, Cale said. But if you come back, I will still be here. A love built on boundaries, she whispered. The only kind that matters. Cale said. Lyra let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since she was decanted in a jar. She leaned into him. I don't want to leave, she said. She closed the distance. She kissed him. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of the tower. It was slow. It was deliberate. It felt like a decision. It tasted of ozone and coffee and the terrifying, wonderful weight of choice. They broke apart, foreheads resting together. Ready? Cale asked. Lyra straightened her jacket. She checked her reflection in the polished marble, the pale skin, the eyes that caught the light, the monster who wasn't a monster. Ready? She said. They walked back out into the light of the tribunal. The weeks that followed were not the clean, happy ending of a storybook. They were messy, loud, and difficult. The council did not collapse overnight. It fractured. Hines was arrested, dragged from his office by his own security detail. But other leaders fled to the outer colonies, taking their fleets with them. Vane remained at large, a ghost in the system, sending threats from encrypted channels. The Medical Harmony Act was repealed. The nanites were deactivated, but the withdrawal was painful. Thousands of people had to go through detox clinics. The economy of the water for blood trade collapsed, leaving entire sectors scrambling for resources. But the truth was out. And truth, like the medicine Lyra used to administer, was bitter but curative. Rico became a media sensation, then a pariah, then a consultant for the new independent information network. He complained about the pay constantly, which meant he was happy. Ilara Vance was released from custody and began the long, hard work of organizing the interim government. And Lyra and Cale, they kept moving. They stood on the observation deck of the Ring of Oaths, watching the final preparations for their departure. They were heading to the frontier. There were rumors of Ethelgard labs still operating in the deep dark, and Lyra intended to find them. To free the others, the view through the massive station glass was blinding. A nearby star was flaring, sending a cascade of gold and violet light spilling across the metal hull of the station. It wasn't sunrise. Space had no sunrise, but it felt like a beginning. Cale checked his wrist comp. A notification pinged. Rico just sent a packet, Cale said, reading the text. He picked up a signature, a stealth corvette matching Vane's registry, Sector 8. That is close to the old breeding grounds, Lyra said, her voice hard. He is trying to salvage his inventory. Then we stop him, Cale said. He looked at her. She was wearing a new coat, one that fit her properly. She looked dangerous, yes, but she also looked whole. Are you tired? Cale asked. Lyra looked at the star flare. She thought about the clinic, the fear, the cage. She thought about the long sleep of her previous life. She reached out and laced her fingers through his. Her grip was strong, warm, and entirely her own. She looked up at him, and that same soft, teasing smile, the one that had started it all, played on her lips. She giggled, a sound of defiance against the dark. "No," she said softly. "This time, we stay awake."